calendar and schedule to be able to get this all in yesterday, but that's okay. And I'm glad you joined me this morning. We've been looking at Proverbs 25 and 26 and dealing with the aspect of relationships. It first talked about our relationship to authority or to kings and rulers. And then it talked about our relationship with neighbors or friends. And then our relationship even with enemies and what God says we're to do and how we're to treat our enemies, those that just disagree with us, or even those who seek to offend us or to do us wrong. And then today we want to look at, Proverbs deals with a little section on what is our relationship to ourselves. What is it that we should do in a relationship to ourselves? How do we view that? What does that mean? Because we live in the day of secular humanism where everything is absorbed in a selfish perspective. And we have all kinds of self-help books out there that are supposed to make a better you. We have this idea that has permeated our society and even woven itself into our Christian circles, that you have to love yourself. Well, that's just not a biblical principle at all. God says we have no problem loving ourselves. That's the problem, is we love ourselves too much. We don't love God enough and we don't love others enough because we love ourselves too much. God even says that for a husband in his relationship to his wife, he needs to make sure that he loves her like he loves himself. In other words, it is very natural to self to protect yourself, to promote yourself, to prosper yourself. And these are things that are very natural to self. And God says, a husband is to make sure he's protecting his wife and prospering his wife and promoting his wife like it's so natural for him to do for himself. And so we don't need to learn to love ourselves, but we need to learn to have the right relationship. In other words, to understand how we are to think about ourselves and what does that entail? What does that involve? And so in Proverbs chapter 26, or chapter 25, we'll start reading in verse number 25. As cold waters to a thirsty soul, so is good news from a far country. And God says, one of the things that is so encouraging is when you get good news about something that you have been investing in, something that you have been praying for, somebody that you love and have been concerned about. Getting good news from them is a wonderful ministry to your soul. It's an encouragement. And God is reminding us that if we're ever going to get good news from afar, we have to personally be interested in things that are outside of ourselves. And so this is a great illustration of importance of giving to missions. It's important that you've adopted a missionary, that you desire to get to know a family specifically and to be able to pray for them specifically and maybe even go visit them on the field and to get a real heartbeat for what they're going through and what they face so that you can pray intentionally for them. And then when you hear how God has answered prayer, when fruit has been born and abounds, you rejoice in that and you feel like you've had a part in that. And that's kind of the picture there as it relates to that illustration. And then verse 26 says, a righteous man falling down before the wicked is as troubled fountain and a corrupt spring. God says, listen, one of the greatest hindrances to the cause of Christ, one of the greatest stumbling blocks to young Christians is when people who know better get themselves involved in wickedness. When people who have had a testimony and they've had an influence, and people follow them because they've been influenced by their testimony and by their teaching. When that person falls into wickedness, when he falls down before wickedness, there is huge trouble that comes. People's faith has been shaken. People's lives have been affected. And it is a very negative thing. And so God is saying, listen, we have a responsibility that we conduct ourselves in such a way that we don't allow our testimony to be stained in that fashion, that we don't become a stumbling block to those that are looking at the Christian life, those who have been under the conviction of the Spirit of God. Sometimes the devil only needs to get a seasoned Christian to fall in order to keep somebody from getting saved. It might be that young Christian who's trying to figure out just how committed and dedicated his life should be to Christ. And all it takes is for a seasoned Christian to stumble and fall, for them to throw in the towel and say, I don't even think this is worth it. And so God is saying, we have a responsibility to maintain a testimony. Now, we can't do it without the help of the Spirit of God, and God's not insinuating that you can. That's why we must walk in the Spirit. That's why we must stay on the path of wisdom, because there are those that God wants to influence for good through our testimony, and in that we're going to have to maintain a good testimony. And that's part of the relationship that we have to ourselves. And then verse number 27 says, "It is not good to eat much honey, so for men to search their own glory is not glory." In other words, God says, listen, two principles are in this verse. The first one is, don't seek to glorify yourself. Don't seek to honor yourself. Don't sing your own praises. Proverbs says in another place that do not praise not to lift yourself up, but let another man praise you. In other words, let other people speak well of what you have done, accomplished. Let them do the speaking. Don't be a self-promoter. Don't be that type of person that's got to build your own honor or build your own glory. God says don't do that. And then the second thing is he's talking about moderation. Sometimes it's just not good to have too much of a good thing. God is saying, moderation is important. Honey is good for you. But if you eat too much honey, it's going to affect you. And the same thing is true of many, many different things. And so God is saying, listen, you want to make sure that you're pacing that which you're doing for the cause of Christ, in the sense of letting God direct your steps, not getting ahead of God, not lagging behind God, but simply walking in step with God so that His will can be accomplished in your life. And in the process, those that are influenced and affected by your testimony and your work for God, they'll be the ones that'll talk about you, and you just let them take care of all of that. Don't try to build your own glory. And then the last couple of things, he that hath no rule over his own spirit is like a city that is broken down and without walls. If you can't rule your spirit, if you've got an anger problem, you're going to ruin your testimony. You're going to try to defend yourself and justify your anger, but you just became a real target for the devil to destroy, and he will destroy you, because with an anger problem, you have very little defense. That's what that verse says. And then the first two verses of chapter 26, as snow in the summer and as rain in the harvest, so honor is not seemly for a fool. In other words, honoring a fool just doesn't fit. And as a bird that by wandering, as the swallow by flying, so a curse causeless shall not come. In other words, to curse somebody and you have no reason to curse them, it'll never stick. It might pique a few curious people's attention. It'll never last. Truth always comes out. And so we're thankful that God says, you know what? You just walk in step with God. You just stay on the path of wisdom. Don't you worry about who notices. Don't you worry about who's affected. Don't you worry about who's influenced by your good character. You just do right. Walk the path of wisdom. Walk in step with the Spirit of God. Let God bless you. And you let God take care of all the rest of it. And that's the best way we can have the right perspective of self. May God bless you today. We'll see you tomorrow morning.